As we always say, we love reports. We love these analyst reports. Nigerian analysts, asset managers, they're doing great work. Half year 2024 begins in earnest. You need to make sure that you have a strategic shift to protect your money and future investments. This is the crux of a new half year 2024 report from CardinalStone Partners, appropriately titled At the Precipice of a Strategic Shift. They've got a review, they've got an outlook, they've got a strategy. We are happy to be joined by Philip Anegbe, CFA, Vice President, Head of Investment Research at CardinalStone Partners. Philip, it is good to see you again. You've been a stranger, you've been a busy man, flying around the world, giving investment advice. Great to have you. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Ruth. It's always a pleasure to be on the program.
Fantastic. So Philip, let's dive in. Let's get into it. I enjoyed reading this thing over the weekend. I hope everybody downloads it and reads it as well. But in summary, I've started doing this thing. I'm starting from the last question first. If we were to summarize this report, are you essentially saying that global macro trends require a consistent realignment of portfolios? What's the summary of the report?
Absolutely. We think that the global economy is a dynamic one. And then to see that your portfolio continues to perform optimally, you have to evolve your strategy. For instance, there are expectations for growth across the globe. And those expectations differ depending on who you are reading.
Yeah.
Right? So there are some that expect some sort of a recessionary risk in the US, for instance.
Yep.
For those set of analysts, they'll be telling you to actually go short on equities.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But then there are others who believe that the global economy, including the US, will reach a safe landing. And for those kind of analysts, when they overlay expectation of normalization of interest rate, they'll tell you to go long on equities.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, there is also the consensus on in the fixed income space that global yields may have reached inflection. And if global rates have reached inflation, then maybe it's time for you to begin to lock in very decent rates because they are not going to be here forever.
Exactly.
In some countries, we are already seeing the normalization of interest rates.
Gotcha.
Right? Then you come to the global, the domestic economy. We think that we are at the precipice, right, of strategic shift.
Gotcha.
Right? Fixed income yields are very high, probably unsustainable. We had the richest man in Nigeria saying that no one can create jobs with interest rate of about 30%.
Right, that's right.
Right, so there's already pressure. And I think in today's news, there was information that CBN may soon start going slow on the rate increases. We're thinking that in the second half of next year, we may begin to see rate cuts.
Okay.
So what do you do now? You lock down the rates. Look at your portfolio, in your asset portfolio. Try to lock down rates. Go long and go big. That's what we said in the report.
I like that. I like that. All right, lots to get into. Thank you for that. Thank you for giving us a taste. All right, Nigeria now, the widening output gap. I want to start there. Your report goes in, talks about 3% GDP growth for the last 3 years. Kind of tepid, saying the output gap remains wide, weak labor productivity, outflow of talent, the Japa syndrome, you talked about that. You noted the 260,000 visa applications from Nigerians to leave in 2023 alone, highest number on record. Can you talk about what is contributing to this issue that we're facing?
Yeah, thank you very much. Productivity is the issue.
Yeah.
So productivity is low, and that is actually affecting our growth, essentially. The trend of growth is sort of affected by low productivity. And if you look at the issue very carefully, you realize that the Japa syndrome we're talking about is only exacerbating it.
Yeah.
But then you have underlying issues like the quality of education. Maybe it's not where it should be, right? You have other issues as security. Security is a big productivity risk in Nigeria.
Right.
Security adversely affects the agricultural sector, for instance. You know, what is the productivity of a farmer, for instance, that will always have to be watching his back?
Right.
You know, or maybe did not have a very good sleep for fear of attacks.
Right.
So what sort of productivity do you expect for such a farmer? What is the productivity of a physician that lacks the basic infrastructure equipment to carry out
electricity?
So equipment or infrastructure deficit is also a key problem in productivity. So it's broad ranging essentially, but then productivity is the issue. And until we begin to tackle productivity, that's when we're going to see remarkable improvement.
You talk about education and quality of education. I can't stop talking about this guy. This 22-year-old in the UK that's been elected to office blows my mind. He's a science student at the University of Cambridge. Okay, let me ask you about this. Since we're talking about productivity, that leads me into minimum wage. And I like the asset managers that are making bold predictions and giving estimates as to where they think they will land. So you folks think that the minimum wage the agreement will rest at 80,000 naira. Of course, deliberations are still there, but you are very welcome to at least give a projection. You're saying it's going to cost government about 1.5 trillion naira. I've been saying this thing is going to be inflationary, but your report corrected me saying that, there's a weak wage inflation link, right, between the two. So the thing is there, can you expand on that, the inflationary metric there, and how we solve this minimum wage issue?
Yeah, first, the minimum wage clamor is a consequence of the short-term impact of reforms.
Yeah.
Right? Obviously, PMS prices are rooftops. AGO is already deregulated, so the prices have been high. And then you have the whole impact of exchange rates, the naira weakness, sort of actually making cost of living crisis a thing.
Yeah.
Right? And that is where the clamor came from. Now, in terms of trying to infer what the cost implication can be for the government, we actually piggybacked on the federal government's statements. More or less, they said the over 400,000 naira minimum wage being advocated for by Labour could cost the government about 9.5 trillion. So you only need to do inference, you draw inferences from that to suggest that maybe 80,000 could cost the government about 1.5 trillion extra personnel expense, right? We are saying 80,000 looks like a fair amount, given that the likes of Edo State are already more or less doing 70,000.
Right,
so maybe they've created some sort of a baseline, or maybe a lower base upon which the federal government can begin bargaining from. But then we look to see what decision they arrived at. But then whatever decision they arrive at must be sustainable. Not just for the federal government, not just for the state government, but also for the private sector, because it becomes legally binding.
Right.
Right? So now in terms of inflation, historically, wages and inflation in Nigeria, right, has had very low correlation, maybe because of the way inflation is computed.
Right.
But then it is what it is. Well, inflation is what the MBS reports, right? But then the inflation that hits you may be different from the inflation that hits me.
Right.
I have my own inflation in my house. I compute it every day, every month. My wife gives me the data, then I compute. So we have different inflation realities. But then we are saying that reported inflation may be the impact may not be a bit as high as people expect, probably because of the way it's computed.
Fantastic. Let's now get to some really hard-hitting charts in your report. In wages and inflation now takes me to poverty. And I think let's do this one at a time. You've got this was great. So you've estimated here, you forecast looking at, up to, we've gone from 2016, 70 million Nigerians living below the poverty line to an estimated 92 million by this year and 93.7 by 2025. So that's one. Then we go to the business profitability. You've got another chart. This is very strong chart here. Business profitability slumping to a historic low on tough macro conditions. You've talked about the reforms and what's happened there. Then we've got GDP per capita, which your report also shows. Yeah, there it is. Great chart showing that falling. And then I think also you chronicled the business exits, the number of firms. Yeah, so GlaxoSmithKline, Sanofi, Bolt Food, Jumia Food, Procter & Gamble, PZ Cussons. So, Philip, how do we turn all of this around? That's part one of my question. I have part two on the 2 trillion naira stimulus that's been asked. Well, how do we turn all this around? This is dire.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's dire stuff.
Absolutely. Short-term pains. I remember, I think we came here after the publication of, say, 2-3 outlooks ago.
Right.
What we said, I think the title was Biting the Bullet.
Right, that's
so
right.
We saw it coming, right? And we forecasted that there's going to be that initial phase, or that transition phase, that businesses and individuals may be pressured. But then you bite the bullet if you want to enjoy the long-term gains.
Right.
Right? Now, in terms of how to turn it around, we think that because a central issue is FX.
Right.
You look at the listed companies, I think NGX 30 company, the non-banking NGX 30 company, about 60% of them reported FX losses.
Wow.
Some had their shareholders' fund completely eroded.
Yeah.
Right, so FX is a big issue. So we should find ways to sustainably improve the FX markets, liquidity and otherwise.
Yeah.
Right. One thing we can do is to try to more or less drive organic growth of FX inflows. I see organic growth. I didn't say just issuing Eurobonds, diaspora, but I think we should also lean towards organic growth. And how can we achieve that? I think we can sort the security problems around oil and gas.
Yeah.
It is not rocket science. I think it can be sorted.
Yeah.
It is determination. It is commitment. It is loyalty to the populace. So we try to sort out security issues around oil and gas and at least take crude production to nearer to 2 million barrels per day. We were at 1.4 million barrels on average last year.
Yeah.
This year we are doing 1.5. We can reach that. And it's interesting to note that NNPC have said they are going to more or less take the bull by the horn, try to drive this initiative. And I think in recent conversations, the representative of the president did hint that they are going to target 2 million barrels per day. I think that organic growth is important, right? Then you can now support those organic growths of FX inflow with other options, right? You want to issue Eurobonds, you want to raise diaspora bond, but then there should be a sound base, and that sound base can only be guaranteed by organic growth of FX.
Yeah.
Fundamentals have to be strong.
Yeah.
And then once fundamentals are strong, it's going to influence how people price your currency.
That makes sense.
So it does. So essentially, that is one. Solve the FX issues, because that's what is biting most of the listed companies. And there are other businesses that are not listed.
That's as if facing the same issues.
They are facing the same issues. Some businesses, some people negotiated, right, contracts, having XYZ exchange rate in mind. But 3 months or 2 months, 3 months down the line, everything's scattered.
Yeah.
So there has to be a bit more predictability. And I think it's interesting that the CBN is now leaning more towards stability as opposed to a particular level. Right? Stability helps businesses to plan over the long term.
Yeah.
So contracts, will be contracts. Right? Then you avoid a lot of litigation and legal issues when, people are unable to fulfill contract. So FX, very critical. But away from that, I think we should begin to take education seriously. Allocations to education must improve. I did say the quality of education can be better, right? Our universities, who do they produce? Mostly people who come out, looking for jobs as opposed to producing entrepreneurs. We should produce entrepreneurs and not job seekers.
Gotcha.
Job seekers that come out maybe, and it's all of us really, right? That entitlement, government has to give me a job. We need to transit from that. We need to produce entrepreneurs. People will come out and say, how do I make this happen? How do I employ just one more person?
Problem solvers.
Essentially. I think that is important.
Yeah.
Then, of course, we should do more on infrastructure. I did mention what exactly is the productivity of a farmer that lacks inputs.
Right. It's
or
low.
The productivity of a physician.
Right.
And that is why many trained professionals are looking for environments where they could, they will have all of this.
Jackpot syndrome, right?
Jackpot syndrome.
Yeah.
So everything sort of reinforces the problem. So by the time you attack the issues multifaceted, from the multi-dimensional perspective, then you begin to reach sustainable solutions.
Solutions are solid. I have to ask you about debt. You got some more great charts. I really, really enjoy these next set of charts on Nigeria's debt, since we're talking about how to solve some of these issues, because there's going to be a lot of spending that is involved. All right, this was great. Debt flows, everybody was talking about that 24 trillion increase. You dimensioned the fact that 74.6% of that is an impact of adverse FX movements. Then you've got the organic debt increase there, showing that local debt 26.8%, and actually external debt without the FX movement down by 1.4%. Next, I believe, was ways and means. You broke that, was it like, no, yes, it was ways and means. So breakdown of ways and means, the total amount 30.9 trillion, the securitized amount 22.7, repayments for the first half of the year, fantastic breakdown. And then I think we had the maturity of debt, debt majority composition as a percentage of GDP through looking at peaking about 45% full year, and then debt to GDP ratio is remaining fairly stable in the near term. So another thing, Philip, because I got one more chart here, you also had the credit ratings, which suggests, as it says there, the headline, credit rating outlook appear mostly positive to Nigeria. So what is the narrative? Is it that the debt situation is a crisis, or based on what the credit reports are saying, it is stable? What's the story with our debt?
First, I would say what we typically say in finance or investment research, that leverage is neutral. It's just a multiplier. Leverage in itself is not bad. Debt is not bad. It is what you do with debt.
Gotcha.
So leverage is simply a multiplier. If you are doing well, it multiplies your profits.
Right. If you're
Right?
doing
If you are
badly,
doing bad, it multiplies your losses.
your losses.
So, having said that,
Yeah.
I think that there are standard gauges or measures to ascertain debt sustainability.
Okay.
I think for IMF benchmark, they have debt to GDP, threshold of I think 55%.
That's right. That's
We're
right.
just in excess of 40%. So data suggests that we're not doing badly.
Yeah.
Data is data.
Right.
And the easiest way to lose an argument is to argue against data.
Right.
Then they also have reserve coverage as another measure. Right? Threshold is 100%. Short-term debt must not be in excess of 100% of your reserve.
Yeah.
Nigeria's is over 50%. So we are still good on that front.
Okay.
And then you have reforms.
Right.
You have reforms. You see the outlook for most rating agencies is saying outlook positive, outlook positive.
Stable,
because they realize, and I think we should realize, that we were always going to face an initial difficult phase.
Right.
Right? So give the reforms time. And while we are giving the reform times, maybe the government on its part should also fast track the provision of safety nets, which includes the minimum wage. And that's why we think the minimum wage is actually a very productive move.
Okay.
And it should be closed fast.
Yeah.
So
not extended
essentially,
forever.
not extended forever, exactly. So we think that the Nigeria's debt is broadly sustainable, and we are leaning fully or completely to the measures. There are measures for these things.
Right.
So it's not random.
Yeah.
I know people will say debt service to revenue, right? But then once you try to encourage that organic growth, right, of FX, try to boost crude production, eventually, and of course you try to more or less expand the tax nets.
Right.
There are a lot of initiatives, trying to block illegalities around tax collection, try to improve tax yield, etc. Then, of course, the revenue becomes bigger. And, of course, the debt service to revenue then becomes better.
Gotcha.
So I think a lot has been happening in the last few months, in the last 1 year. But I think whilst we are calling on the government to actually hasten the provision of safety nets, we should also realize that there's a waiting time to achieve progress.
The clock is ticking. Quickly, inflation. A number of outlets have been saying they see it peaking. Can you talk? I think you got a chart for inflation. What's the story here? Do you think is it based on base effects? What's the reason why you think you see inflation? I guess peaking at what is it where it is now before country as year on year though decelerating? What's the story there?
Yeah, we think that inflation may have peaked.
Yeah.
And this is supported by the moderations we've seen. I think month-on-month inflation has moderated for about 3 months.
Yep.
And of course, the key driver for the year-on-year moderation is likely to be a high base effect. And we're likely to see that play out in the second half of the year. But in addition to high base effects, you see that there's likely to be a pass-through from lower AGO prices thanks to Dangote refinery.
Yeah.
Right, so there will be a pass-through. Even for most listed companies, we expect that their energy costs or the profile of their energy costs would improve in the second half. So energy costs for those listed companies are likely to moderate because a lot of them rely on AGO. Right?
And that's diesel for those who are diesel. Yeah.
So essentially, we expect inflation to moderate, year-on-year inflation to moderate in the next half.
Okay.
It's not to say that
if prices just
are
coming down,
prices are collapsing.
Yeah.
Just for clarity,
Right.
It's to say that the pace of increase will sort of taper out.
Good disclaimer there. Good disclaimer.
So that you don't go to the market and say, give me a bag of rice for 10,000
I say
naira.
Philip said that it's going to come down. Look, money supply, Philip. Because this data released by the CBN, this is looking at May, year on year in May. I mean, we're almost at 100 trillion. So, I mean, what about this? If this keeps climbing, how do you get inflation to, at least on this side, this pressure point? What's your view on what we're seeing with money supply?
Well, I think that money supply, there's historical research, CBN research that suggests that I think the data they used was data between from 1970 to about 2020. It suggests that money supply accounts for about 50% of inflationary pressure.
Yeah.
However, we think that may have slightly changed.
Okay.
And that is because we have seen energy, right? The PMS issue, following the partial removal of subsidy and following the floating of exchange rate. So those two, energy and FX, is likely to be more having more impact on inflation for now.
Yeah.
That's what we think. But then we think that money supply growth, if you say too much money chasing few goods, it's a basic definition. People naturally say maybe it's inflationary.
Yeah.
Right? But we think that there's now a greater role for FX and then energy just because of the policy shift. Right? But then the base effect, right, is likely to be very strong. So much so that a lot of that impact will be offset.
Fantastic. Phil, less than a minute to go. The last chart here, we could spend the rest of the day on the charts from this report. Equities, looks like Nigerian NGX outperforming some of its peers. What's the equity play for the second half of the year as far as Nigerian stocks are concerned? Yeah, that's for those that are looking, the purple line that is at the highest level, that's Nigeria versus everyone, at least others compared. What's the look? What's the equity play?
Yeah, in terms of equity play, we lean more or less to fundamentals, right? Strategically, we think the macros favor upstream oil and gas.
Okay, so like a Seplat.
Like Seplat, I think the macros favor them. And of course, there's also a tactical element for Seplat, the MPNU deal.
Right.
And then we think that overall, the mix of the environment also favors banks, right? The recapitalization is likely to boost their performances over the medium term.
Yeah.
Even though people have sort of overreacted and selling banks, and we think that those sell-offs have actually created opportunity.
Buying opportunities.
Buying opportunities. Yeah. What we think is, with recapitalization, their interest-earning asset base grows. And in an environment with elevated interest rates, those interest-earning assets will be deployed to high-yielding opportunities.
Gotcha. Yeah.
They will tie down those opportunities, decent rates, and their performances are likely to be good.
Yeah.
So it's one to be looking at. Then, of course, we also like stocks that have a mix of three characteristics. One is low leverage. Of course, when the interest rate environment is high, you want to go for stocks that have low leverage because of the impact of on finance costs.
Yeah.
Then we like stocks with low or more manageable net FX exposure.
Okay.
Of course, FX is, I've talked about
central.
the impact.
And
then
the third one?
lastly, robust cash position. So in that bucket, we see fitting stocks like Transcorp, we see fitting stocks like UAC and Unilever. Yeah. We like Okomu Oil as well, and a few other ones.
Philip Anegbe, Vice President, Head of Investor Research at CardinalStone Partners. Fantastic report. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate you coming on.